chapter 100 of 100 Years Quest is on the horizon. In the next 2 weeks, we'll meet that triple mark number. I actually really want to just at some point, think of all the canon content, and if you converted that, like however much there is to manga chapters, how much manga chapters there would be. Because, for instance, the 2 anime arcs would be easily somewhere around like 40 to 50 chapter arcs. And they're both canon, so you have to kind of add it like that. So, this just makes me wonder if, like, how close Fairy Tail would actually be to hitting 1,000 chapters or more with that. Because, like, it's the same thing, like, I know One Piece has, like, 1,000 plus. Naruto, I wonder if Naruto would be above that as well, with its full canon content. But anyway, not important to the overall, chapter right now. So, this one, I figured that we were going to be getting more into the Laxus and Kirin fight, because that to me was what was going to logically be the next setup. And then the only other thing that made sense to happen, that did happen, was Natsu, Lucy, and Happy were turned back to normal after Haku was defeated by Wendy. Again, when Haku gets back up, I'm hoping that he gets back up, and then we get confirmation that if a character gets back to their feet, then Celine will count them again. But if he gets back up, I'm hoping in his if he fights again, he doesn't go up against Wendy, because obviously the thing with Wendy that crutched him was he wasn't trying to really hurt her in their fight. But besides that, we actually got the Labyrinth shifting. It was really interesting that something that Celine didn't know was going to happen, went down. It wasn't done in some, crazy reveal that it was, a mind-boggling event towards, her and what's going on. It was more of, oh, well, this is a neat feature to, to go down on. So, I was happy about that. I like the concept, though, especially, too, because a Labyrinth shifting is something that you would expect, but it was something that I wasn't really thinking of at all in context to this whole setup. But I guess that makes a lot of sense, because the Dogremag Labyrinth, even though Dogremag, as far as we know, is dead, the Labyrinth is still alive, it's still growing. He still has these creatures inside of it that are created from his body and powered off of, these weird little cores. But, beyond that point, we have, Laxus and Kirin actually splitting off. Again, I would have liked to see more of that fight. It makes me wonder more, though, of if that fight is getting split now, and it's going to be something that Laxus comes across later to have a further fight with, what's that, how is he going to get stronger over this period? Is he going to, I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, well, what if he meets up with Natsu at some point, and then him and Natsu decide to fight, kind of, have more of a, an all-out spar, but it's they would have, they'd have to have Wendy nearby. You would have to have a way to logically, after that point, get them in a training situation that somehow was both effective enough, which Dragon Force by itself can be a potential big gap closer, but you have to do a lot for their characters to kind of get either Gajil or Laxus, in this more Kirin focused example, to actually get them up to that, because we know that there's a difference in Dragon Force variations. With 5th gen, we know that theirs is just it just is out of hand, and it just completely overcomes them, and they become these wild, mindless dragons. Whereas Lacrima based Dragon Force, from having either being 2nd gen or being 3rd gen, and relying more on the Lacrima, you are you have Dragon Force, but it's way weaker. And then there's the artificially induced that Natsu, Wendy, Gajil have all had. And then the actually achieved Dragon Force, when you achieve it through your own power and through your own scaling grasp on the magic. But that point is still something that I'm hoping we get back to when it comes to Laxus, because Laxus and Gajil, I think they both deserve some form of boost. Laxus less so, because he's got the whole Red Lightning Dragon mode, but with Gajil hasn't gotten anything like that in a long time, so I think Gajil definitely, as I've ranted about him in other videos, he deserves it more so than Laxus. But Laxus logically has to get some form of advancement in his ability if he's going to fight Kirin again, in some way, shape, or form. I also did like that when the Labyrinth was shifting, that Gajil went to go help Carla. It's just how Gajil is, even though he looks very menacing, he's actually a really nice guy. But like that split up between Laxus and Kieran was very cool. Like you had like the ground splitting and they're on opposite ends of it. And Laxus, I like that Laxus isn't looking like he's in like a panic mode. Obviously he was losing, but it's still something that he was, you know, actively trying to still like, you know, partake. And he still wanted to be in that fight. He still was trying to win. I don't think his Red Lightning Dragon mode would be that much of a gap closer when it comes to Kieran, because obviously the hardship with Kieran is that overwhelming power plus, you know, atmospheric distortion. It's very overpowered, but we'll just have to wait and see. Like getting what we got for more of an opening fight that was just designed to get us an understanding of the gap between Laxus and Kieran, and obviously people adjacent to Kieran, was pretty good. And I liked getting a good display of Kieran's character. I did really like his general display of who he was, and we can say that we've seen all four now, and I think you can kind of wait maybe a little bit more for Misaki, but I think this chapter gave enough to really give us an understanding of her, and I'll get to that when we get to the part with her character. But at one point, Erza and Gray end up falling down, and there's a funny part where he lands on her, and then she like grabs him and pulls him close because there was like a booby trap, and then off in the distance, Juvia is just having some weird sensation, obviously, of somebody touching Gray, but she thinks that it's Gajiel doing something, which I think is pretty funny. But at the same time, I think with the way that that she thinks, that makes sense. The thing though that makes me wonder, because they like Juvia and Levy are talking briefly, and it's like that. Oh, they're aware that Gajiel disappeared very suddenly, and I wonder at like what point would it have to be for them to be concerned, because they don't seem too concerned. Granted, they are aware the 100 Years quest and stuff is going on, and I bet they would be smart enough to piece two Dragon Slayers disappearing in a dragon related quest. They could probably figure that out, but at the same time, I'd just be like, oh shit, like what's going on with like what's going on exactly with Gajiel and Laxus? He just vanished without any form of warning. I think the only logical thing you could do is just assume it has to do with the 100 Years quest and then just kind of move on. But once Gajiel like flies down and hits Gray in like a forehead to forehead, very reminiscent of like when Natsu and Gray did it way back in Eisenwald. Obviously Natsu was flipped over, but still that forehead to forehead like smash just has a little bit of that early series nod kind of humor. Wendy having Panther Lily carry Haku isn't a surprise, even though that Haku is an enemy, he's still a kid. I feel like Wendy would try and do anything for any of these guys that aren't evil, because, like I've said, none of Diablos has really seemed evil. The closest you really could get is Nibaru, who seems more primitive and primal, and Kyria, who's just more of like a bit of a reckless psycho girl sometimes. So, between the two of them, I would definitely say that if that's their threshold for like that's their like ceiling of evil, that it's not really that bad, because you also have taken into consideration that Fairy Tail messed with them on top of that, and they weren't just going after civilians, they were going after their enemies. Furthering that, there's some like moments between Natsu and Lucy I thought was funny, just some of the normal Natsu and Lucy kind of like awkward situation, and Happy does comment it, so I think that's Mishima being a little bit meta, because I know Mishima wants to move a lot of the ships forward in 100 Years quest. Logically so, you do the main character one last, because that's the one that everyone's been waiting for the longest. I would assume that he's going to do that, because like everybody else is pretty much established enough that we can really call it like a for sure ship, whereas like even though Natsu and Lucy is obvious, we don't have that like canonization enough of it. But again, I think that's because Mishima's just waiting the longest for it, on purpose. But they end up getting separated when the Labyrinth moves again, and Lucy ends up against Kyria. Now this is about what I expected. I made my estimations on the fights for the Dogromag Labyrinth, and I've been pretty spot on. The only ones that I haven't gotten, it's at least so far, is Gray versus Skullion, because obviously why would they not have that rematch? And Gajiel versus Mad Bull, because you would have a fight between two extremely durable people who, you know, obviously their durability is one of the things that is emphasized in their type of magic. But Kyria is strong. I don't think, though, that Lucy is going to have too much of a problem, given what we saw, like, Erza, when Erza actually started to really put effort into fighting Kyria, and she was obviously putting, you know, he was obviously defeating her, but on top of that, we see, like, their comparison of fights with Laxus, and when you obviously see where, like, their levels are compared to, say, Erza putting in more effort, obviously being stronger, or them both fighting Laxus, Erza almost winning, and Kyria getting relatively beaten with low difficulty, you would, you know, assume that obviously she is somebody that is... She's somebody that can fight Erza, but obviously Erza can defeat with not a ton of effort if she really put into it. Whereas Erza put more effort into defeating Yoko than it was defeating Kyria. And Yoko, Hakune, and Mimi should all be relatively on level. So somebody who I think is a harder fight for, like, in general, like Mimi. I'd say the difference between Mimi and Kyria, I was like fumbling over Kyria, is that Kyria, like, the personality difference, but obviously Blades versus Blunt Force is obviously going to have a different degree of damage application. But on top of that, she's a Dragon Slayer, so it adds an extra level of ferocity to it, and on top of that, she has Dragon Force, I would assume, if she ever decides to pop it. I don't imagine that if she is going to have a, you know, full-scale fight with Lucy, that she would use Dragon Force. Because one, I think that she would abide by that rule. She's obviously not as... She's not as foolish as Nibaru. I don't think that she'd be willing to transform into a dragon beyond her control. Would be worth beating Lucy in a fight where Lucy's not going to kill her. But, you know, obviously that can happen. I don't think it's going to happen, because though I think Lucy should be able to beat Kyria with, like, a upper medium level of difficulty. But if Kyria goes Dragon Force, I don't see any way that Lucy could win. Unless, like, Lucy, like, unlocks some really new overpowered Star Dress combo, which I don't think would happen, because I don't think she would have anything that would relatively work in that kind and that favor of that point, because obviously at the point of becoming a dragon, she's going to have levels of magic resistance, she's going to be way physically stronger, way more durable, all her stats and capabilities are going to be drastically increased. So I think that fight is going to be relatively straightforward. I'm hoping we see some more from Kyria, like a couple more techniques, maybe we see a flashback, get some form of information on Diablos' members, like, you know, how did Georg meet them and stuff. Just any general information on Diablos as a guild and its members in their origin as Dragon Slayers. Because 5th Gen is still a mystery in its, like, creation, and then a lot of questions. Like, obviously eating dragons, but, like, Georg logically invented it then? What was the situation? And the one thing I really want to know, does eating a dragon, like, how much of their power do you get by consuming them? Because I think logically it would make a lot of sense for, like, this many extremely powerful people, whether it's Kyria, who's still powerful, even though she's not as powerful as, like, main cast members, but then you get to, like, the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights and how powerful they are. The idea of, like, characters this strong being still existent, I think would make a lot of sense if they got, like, a cheap boost by eating a dragon from Georg pretty much taking them on a dragon hunt, killing a dragon with them and being like, here, and then, you know, making them a dragon, so giving them a free large-scale power increase and turning them into the dragon slayers they are now. Like, there's still a lot of questions, I think, that need to be answered for the Dragon Eater's origin and the mechanics of exactly how it all works. But beyond that, I do think that Lucy is going to have a medium to upper medium level fight. I don't think it's going to be as hard as Mimi. Maybe it would be, but at the same time, I still see Lucy winning. I think Lucy, on top of where she should be able to sit at a higher level, like after defeating Mimi, especially with, like, the sheer amount of firepower Rhonometria has. But she is primarily a fighter of intelligence, somebody who uses strategies and, like, very trick moves in order to set up and defeat her opponent. Whereas Kyria is really just a all-in attacker. And I think the Mimi fight was something that really would have trained her for this fight. So what we're going to see in this one, to me, it's to me, I think it's the most intriguing out of these next fights. Like the Misaki Erza fight, I think is really interesting for finding out Misaki's character, finding out exactly what Misaki's Dragon Slayer attribute is. Same thing, obviously, with Kirin, Suzaku, finding out more about Suzaku's Dragon Slayer type, finding out what Haku is as well. Like general information on them. But I think that the fight with Lucy and Kyria holds a lot of potential for information, but also a more generalized fight. Because I think that's one of the most balanced fights we're going to get. All of the Dark Dragon Slayer Knight should be more powerful than any of the main cast one-on-one, except for Natsu. I still think Natsu with Dragon Force has the potential to beat one of them, but obviously everybody else is weaker than them and would lose in, current understanding 1v1 against the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights. Wendy and Haku is like a specific match because it takes very specific variables of Haku's personality into account, but for everybody else, they would lose. So in this one, where we have Lucy and Kyria, of two characters that I believe should be around par with each other, we will get a very good fight of just a a fair back and forth of like moves to attack. Whereas like the other characters, I think are going to be in more uphill battles for their opponents. So that one to me, I think is going to be really good, because on top of that, like more even fight, I think has more of an opportunity for dialogue. So again, we could get more information on Diablos, which is something I really want to get. Diablos, as I've mentioned, and I'll be brief on it, because obviously I don't want to go into it as I mentioned before. I've really liked Diablos as an antagonist group. I've liked all their members, and I'm happy to find out more about them. But after the point, Erza, Gray, and Gajul running into Misaki. And this is where I said that Misaki showed us a little bit of her character. Because when she meets them, she's like saying how she's looking for Kyria and how she's reckless without her. And one thing I really wanted to know when we get the officials is, in a previous chapter, she referred to, Kyria referred to Misaki as her sister, or get to the fan translations of the series. But for now, she calls her protege. I don't think it's really that important other than character content right now, if they are actually related. But this is something just to wonder about their two characters, and it could give backstory information when we end up getting to, hopefully, like I said, actual backstory origin content. Just a matter of time at this point. When she ends up using her ability, we don't have any known information on what it is. It's just like weird pressure or force. She says that she was trying to tear Erza's body apart with the first attack. So like I said, that we do get a bit of an understanding of her personality. If she was trying to instantly kill somebody, just get rid of them on the first encounter, she doesn't seem to waste a lot of time. Even when she was trying just to mess with Erza, she ends up cutting her hair, which results in a reaction that I think most people would be able to assume. But she was trying to rip all of it out, but it's only able to do a portion. I think that's just her also underestimating Erza's capabilities on top of that. Because if she was trying to straight rip her body apart, but only ended up ripping her armor apart, her body was fine, that just means that obviously she put less power into what she would have actually needed, and that Erza withstood the level that was applied to her. So obviously a little bit of either hype or understanding of her little bit of effort but lack of time to waste kind of personality. Beyond that point, I think what everybody is otherwise excited, I think probably the most people. I think this chapter you had the most hype people for Suzaku stands and people who are waiting to find out more about Misaki. Personally, I wanted to get to that Kyria Lucy fight for more of a balanced match or potential lore reasons. But for Natsu and Suzaku, I think the big thing for him, he needs to go in not in his base. That's the thing that screwed him this last time. Dude's got all these power-up forms for a reason. He needs to use them. Whereas Suzaku, similar to somebody like Gildarts, doesn't have power-up forms, so all his power really is in that base point. It just depends on how much power he wants to flex onto his opponents, into what abilities. And Suzaku would be the same way. We know that they have Dragon Force, but they can't use it the same as pretty much anybody else, so I don't think that's something you can really count in their arsenal.
It's something that is like a last resort. You can see it, and in a hypothetical match, you can kind of like be like, well, what if they use this? But logically in the story, there has to be a reason for them to do it if they know they shouldn't. And it's something they can't control after it goes off. But once we get to this fight, I really want to get to a point where we like get some dialogue between these two, because it's obviously we know that they are only at odds through misunderstanding. And once they actually figure out like how things are really looking, I think they can put their differences aside, team up, and hopefully take down Celine. I think that's something that was bound to happen. I think that's something a lot of people assume is going to happen. And I think it's something they're going to need, because obviously Celine is like in a league of her own, especially in her dragon form. She's not hindered. She doesn't have anything to really work around. Because like when you look at Acnologia, he had the weakness to motion sickness that all Dragon Slayers have. That's something that he has that the Dragon Gods don't. But whereas Mercephobia, who was being manipulated by Ferris, he did not have the full capacity of his mind. He was pretty much a rampaging monster. And Alderaan, because of how he got powerful, worked mechanically, and was weakened at the point where he was defeated because the other members around the cities destroyed the god seeds that were connected to him. So right now, I think that this is more of a setup chapter. I think that's something that definitely needs to be stated as well. Like, not a lot happened. The Labyrinth shifted, some more matches were set up, but obviously chapter 100 for this continuation being the next thing in 2 weeks. It makes sense to me why you would put 99 at something that's, going to be a big setup. 100 might not even be a furthering of each of these fights. It might be something completely different. Maybe Celine is going to make some form of move. We know that she likes to always keep herself entertained, so she might throw a new thing into this whole labyrinth in order to, to make it more entertaining. And I mentioned, again, this is another thing that I've mentioned, but it's something that I think needs to be brought up, because I think it's something that it's not one of those things that it's like a good theory of like, yeah, this could happen. I think it's something that kind of has to happen, and that's seeing Celine's other children. It'd be weird to have her name that she has plural children as like this ancient dragon and then not do anything with any of them, because otherwise, like, we need to have confirmation they're all dead. Other than that, I think this is a pretty solid chapter. I think we got a lot of small areas moved along. I'm hoping 101 is more of like a big plot twist, wrench in the machine kind of chapter. And then chapter 101 is like when we start to get to the focused fights between these guys. Either way, like I said, solid chapter, good. It was not too crazy, but I mean, it was crazy for a setup chapter. I think we got to look at it as what it is, because obviously it wasn't a fight chapter, it wasn't a lore chapter, it was a setup chapter. It was a pretty good setup chapter. So I think actually when I look at it from that perspective, that gives it a little bit more of like a fair rating, because obviously instead of comparing it to like, oh, the Laxus and Erza fight, instead it's like, oh, well, it was like a setup chapter. Okay, compared to other setup chapters. Much more fair. Makes way more sense. Other than that, like I said, though, comment below, thumbs up the video, friend, like button, subscribe, and check out my other videos, and thank you all for listening.